They married in secret, loving in shadows. Now she's pregnant with her CEO's twins. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to the channel. I want to start by thanking each and every one of you from the deepest part of my heart for the incredible love and support you've shown for the last story. Your comments, your encouragement, and your time mean the world to me, and I'm beyond grateful for this amazing community we're building together. Before we dive into today's video, I want to take a moment to offer a beautiful prayer for you. May your heart always find peace. May love fill your life and bring you happiness, and may you be surrounded by the light of hope and joy each and every day. May all your dreams come true, and may you always know that you are loved beyond measure. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening to this story from? What part of the world are you in today? I feel so connected to you all, no matter where you are, and your thoughts and experiences are so important to me. And if you haven't already, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You are truly important to me, and together we can continue this beautiful journey. Thank you for being here, and let's get started with today's story. Elena Carter sat in the luxurious penthouse, her fingers gripping the edge of her seat as she tried to process the surreal reality unfolding before her. Across from her, Adrian Sinclair, the ruthless billionaire CEO whose name alone could shake industries, sat with effortless composure, his blue eyes locked onto her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. She had always known the world of the elite was different, but nothing had prepared her for this. A marriage contract, a deal that would change the course of her life forever. The room was filled with an eerie silence, the distant hum of New York City barely reaching them through the massive glass windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. The glittering skyline, so breathtaking from this height, felt like a cruel reminder of how far removed she was from this world of power and luxury. Just hours ago, she had been struggling to keep her dreams afloat, working tirelessly to establish herself as a designer while barely scraping by. Bills had piled up, opportunities had slipped through her fingers, and despite her undeniable talent, the world had continued to push her down. And now, sitting in the presence of a man who could change her life with a single stroke of his pen, she found herself teetering on the edge of an irreversible decision. Adrian leaned back in his chair, exuding an air of absolute authority, his expression unreadable as he watched her with calculating precision. He was a man who never acted on impulse, who measured every move as if the world were a chessboard and he was always 10 steps ahead. And yet, he had chosen her, not a socialite, not an heiress, but her. A struggling designer with nothing to offer but her name and the promise of discretion. "I need a wife," he stated, his voice smooth, firm, leaving no room for negotiation. His tone carried the weight of a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted, and for a brief moment, Elena wondered if anyone had ever dared to refuse him. She swallowed hard, her throat dry as she stared at the marriage contract placed neatly between them on the polished black table. The words seemed to taunt her, a silent reminder that she was about to make a decision that would alter the course of her life forever. "A marriage," she murmured, more to herself than to him, as if saying it aloud would make it more real. Adrian's gaze never wavered. "A business arrangement," he corrected, his voice devoid of emotion. "In exchange, you will have financial security, complete freedom to pursue your career, and access to resources that would otherwise take you years to obtain." The offer was tempting, almost too good to be true, but Elena couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in her gut. This wasn't just a contract, it was a life sentence. "Why me?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the weight of the question hanging between them like an unspoken challenge. Adrian didn't flinch. "Because I trust you," he said simply, as if that alone should be enough to silence her doubts. But trust Trust was a word people threw around carelessly, a word she had learned to be wary of. She had spent her entire life fighting for a place in a world that had constantly told her she wasn't good enough, that she didn't belong. And now this man, this powerful, untouchable billionaire, was telling her that he trusted her. It didn't make sense. "You barely know me," she pointed out, forcing herself to maintain eye contact even as her pulse pounded in her ears. "And yet, you want to marry me?" A flicker of something unreadable passed through his gaze, gone before she could decipher it. "I don't have time for emotional complications," he replied, his voice as steady as ever. "This is strictly business. You need security. I need a wife. It's a simple exchange." Simple. Nothing about this felt simple. Marriage was supposed to be about love, about commitment, about two people choosing to spend their lives together because they couldn't imagine a world without each other. But this was a transaction, a deal sealed with a signature rather than a vow of devotion. And yet, what choice did she have? She had spent the past year barely surviving, watching her dreams slip further out of reach while the weight of reality crushed her beneath its unrelenting force. This was a chance to finally breathe, to finally live without fear of the next bill, the next missed opportunity, the next failure, and Adrian Sinclair was offering it to her on a silver platter. All she had to do was say yes. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the pen resting beside the contract, the cool metal pressing against her skin like a silent promise of the future she was about to walk into. This wasn't just a signature. This was surrender. This was stepping into a world where love had no place, where emotions were liabilities, where the man she would call her husband would never be hers in the way that truly mattered. But still, she signed. "All right," she whispered, the word barely escaping her lips as she forced herself to meet Adrian's gaze. "I'll do it." His lips curved into the faintest smirk, a reaction so small yet so telling. He had expected this. He had known she would agree. "Good," he said, standing with effortless grace as he buttoned his suit jacket. "We marry tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word echoed in her mind, a chilling reminder of how little time she had to process what she had just agreed to. No long engagement, no time to prepare, no time to escape. She was about to become Mrs. Adrian Sinclair, a man she barely knew, a man who didn't believe in love, a man whose presence alone made her breath catch and her pulse race, for reasons she refused to acknowledge. As she rose to her feet, she felt his gaze follow her, an unspoken weight settling between them. He had won. This was his game, and she had just become another carefully placed piece on his board. But as she walked toward the elevator, her heart pounding, a single thought burned in her mind. Would this decision save her or destroy her? Because something about Adrian Sinclair told her that this was not just a deal. This was the beginning of something she would never be able to control. The wedding was nothing like Eleanor had imagined. No grand hall filled with flowers, no music playing softly in the background, no long aisle to walk down as guests watched with teary eyes, no flowing white dress, no bouquet in her hands, no nervous excitement or whispered congratulations. Instead, it was a quiet, clinical affair held in the office of a private judge, where vows were exchanged in hushed tones. A signature was placed on the marriage certificate, and just like that, she became Mrs. Adrian Sinclair. There was no moment of celebration, no embrace or lingering kiss, just a businesslike handshake from the judge and the rustling of papers being filed away. Eleanor stood there in her simple beige dress, feeling both like a bride and a stranger in her own story. She stole a glance at Adrian, who remained unreadable, his suit impeccable, his stance composed. He had barely looked at her since the moment they had stepped into the courthouse, and now as they walked out together into the cool evening air, she felt more alone than ever. She had thought that marriage, even one built on a contract, would feel different, that perhaps something inside her would shift, that the weight of the commitment would settle into her bones. But as she slid into the back seat of his sleek black car, watching the city lights blur past through the tinted windows, she realized that nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Adrian sat beside her, silent, his focus on his phone, his fingers scrolling through messages with the same disinterest he had shown throughout the day. If not for the golden wedding band now resting on his left hand, no one would have guessed that he had just taken a wife. The realization made Elena's stomach tighten. To the world, they were strangers. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. She turned slightly, studying his profile, the sharp angle of his jaw, the way his lashes cast faint shadows over his cheekbones. There was a tension in his shoulders, subtle but there, like a man carrying a weight no one else could see. She wanted to say something, anything, to break the suffocating silence between them, but the words refused to come. Instead, she shifted her gaze back to the window, trying to focus on the blur of neon signs and headlights instead of the unsettling presence beside her. When they arrived at his penthouse, Elena stepped inside, her breath catching as she took in the breathtaking view. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the entire city, stretching out beneath them like a living, breathing masterpiece. The skyline sparkled against the night, the soft glow of the buildings reflecting in the glass, making the space feel endless. It was the kind of place she had only ever seen in magazines, sleek, modern, and exuding quiet luxury. But it wasn't the marble floors or the designer furniture that made her pulse quicken. It was him. She turned, finding Adrian standing a few steps away, his jacket already discarded, his fingers loosening the silk tie around his neck. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her stomach flip. It was the first time since the ceremony that he had acknowledged her presence in more than just words, and the weight of that attention sent a shiver down her spine. "We may be married on paper," he said, his voice low and smooth, "but we have rules." He stepped closer, his movements unhurried, controlled, as if measuring her reaction. "In the office, we're nothing but employer and employee. No one can know." His tone left no room for argument, and Elena found herself nodding automatically, her throat suddenly dry. "And here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. A slow, dangerous smirk played at the corner of his lips, one that sent heat curling through her veins. "Here," he murmured, reaching out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering just long enough to make her heart stutter. "We don't have to pretend." The air between them shifted, heavy with something unspoken, something that had been lurking beneath the surface since the day he had proposed this arrangement. Elena felt her pulse quicken, her body reacting before her mind could catch up. This was dangerous. He was dangerous, and yet as he took another step closer, the space between them shrinking, she couldn't bring herself to move away. His scent, clean, masculine, with the faintest hint of cedar, wrapped around her, intoxicating. He had always exuded power, always carried himself with the confidence of a man who was used to having the world at his feet. But here, in this moment, there was something else in his gaze, something raw, something that made her knees weak. She didn't move as he reached for her, his fingers skimming down her arm in a touch so light it sent a shiver racing through her. He was testing the waters, seeing how far she would let him go, and God help her. She didn't want to stop him. "Adrian," she started, but the word barely made it past her lips before he silenced her with a look. "You knew what this deal entailed, Elena," he murmured, his thumb tracing a slow, deliberate path along the inside of her wrist. "You knew what you were agreeing to." She swallowed hard, her mind screaming at her to say something, to remind him that this was supposed to be a business arrangement. But her body had already betrayed her. She had told herself she wouldn't get caught up in this, that she would keep her emotions locked away, that this marriage wouldn't mean anything. But standing here, with Adrian's hands on her skin, with his gaze burning into hers like a promise, she knew she was already in trouble. Because what had started as a deal was starting to feel real, too real, and she wasn't sure she would be able to survive it. Elena should have known better. From the very moment she signed that marriage contract, she had promised herself she wouldn't let emotions complicate things. She had drawn lines, set boundaries in her mind, convinced herself that this arrangement was nothing but a means to an end. And yet, as she stood in Adrian's lavish penthouse, watching the man she had just married loosen his tie, roll back his sleeves, and pour himself a glass of whiskey with effortless confidence, she felt her heart pound against her ribs. It was an unfamiliar sensation, this rapid thumping, this restless energy that coursed through her veins whenever he was near. She wasn't supposed to feel this way. She wasn't supposed to want him. But the truth had a way of creeping up on her, undeniable and consuming. Adrian turned toward her, the amber liquid swirling in his glass as his piercing blue eyes locked onto hers. There was something unreadable in his gaze, something dark and knowing, as if he could see straight through the carefully crafted facade she was desperately trying to maintain. "You're nervous," he observed, his voice deep and smooth, carrying across the spacious room with a quiet authority that made her shiver. Elena straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to meet his gaze without faltering. "No," she lied, the single word escaping her lips with practiced ease. A slow, knowing smirk curved his lips as he took a step toward her, his movements deliberate, unhurried, like a predator closing in on its prey. "Good," he murmured, his voice dropping lower, "because there's no reason to be." But there was. Because no matter how many times she told herself that this marriage was just a contract, no matter how much she tried to suppress the awareness thrumming between them, it was impossible to ignore. The chemistry had been there from the start, simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to ignite. And now, standing here, alone with him in his penthouse, with the soft glow of the city lights casting long shadows across the room, it felt as if the entire world had shrunk down to just the two of them. She turned away, needing a moment to steady her breath, to remind herself why she was here, why she couldn't afford to let emotions complicate things. But before she could regain her composure, she felt him behind her, close, so close that she could feel his warmth, his presence, the quiet dominance he exuded without even trying. Her body tensed, awareness prickling along her skin. Elena. Her name rolled off his tongue like a quiet command, making her breath hitch. His voice was lower now, more intimate, more dangerous. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to turn and face him, her heart hammering against her ribcage. "Are you afraid of me?" His gaze was unwavering, searching hers for something she wasn't sure she could give. "No," she whispered, but the word came out too fast, too breathless. Something flickered in his eyes. Desire, curiosity, something deeper. "Good," he whispered, and then, before she could think, before she could rationalize, before she could remind herself of all the reasons this was a bad idea, she felt the warmth of his fingers tilt her chin up. And then his lips were on hers. The world melted away. His kiss was slow at first, deliberate, as if savoring the taste of her. He wasn't rushing, wasn't demanding. Instead, he kissed her like he had all the time in the world, like he was claiming her in a way that was more dangerous than any words he could ever say. His lips moved against hers with practiced ease, coaxing, teasing, until she gasped against his mouth. And that was all it took. The moment she parted her lips, the moment she surrendered to the fire burning between them, Adrian deepened the kiss. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him, his body a solid wall of heat and strength. His hands traced down her back, his touch firm, possessive, as if he had been waiting for this moment just as much as she had. Eleanor felt herself unraveling, her fingers tangling in his shirt, gripping onto him as if he were the only thing keeping her grounded. She wasn't thinking about the contract anymore. She wasn't thinking about rules or boundaries or the consequences of crossing this line. All she could think about was him, the way his lips moved against hers, the way his hands explored her body like he was memorizing every curve, the way his breath mingled with hers, warm and intoxicating. She should have stopped. She should have pulled away, reminded him that this was not part of the deal, that this was dangerous territory neither of them should be treading. But instead, she let herself fall deeper, let herself get lost in the way he felt against her. Adrian broke the kiss, just long enough to murmur her name against her lips, his breath warm, his voice raw. Elena. She looked up at him, her eyes glazed with heat, her lips swollen from his kiss. And in that moment, she knew. She knew that no matter how much they tried to keep this marriage professional, no matter how many times they told themselves that this was just a contract, this, whatever it was between them, was beyond their control. And when Adrian lifted her into his arms, carrying her toward his bedroom, Elena had never felt this way before. Lying in the soft silk sheets of Adrian's massive bed, she stared at the ceiling, her mind a whirlwind of emotions she couldn't control. The heat of last night still lingered on her skin, the memory of his touch burning through her like an intoxicating dream. Her body still ached in the most delicious way. Every inch of her reminded of the way he had claimed her, worshipped her, made her feel like she was the only woman in the world. But as the golden morning light filtered through the massive windows of his penthouse, reality settled in, heavy and suffocating. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to fall into his bed. Turning her head, she found Adrian sleeping beside her, his face relaxed, his breathing deep and steady. He looked different in sleep, softer, almost vulnerable. The usual sharpness in his features, the cold, calculated air he carried during the day, was gone. Instead, he looked peaceful, beautiful. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding as she allowed herself to take him in, to memorize the way his dark lashes contrasted against his sculpted cheekbones, the way his lips, the same ones that had kissed her senseless last night, were slightly parted. Her fingers itched to trace the strong lines of his jaw, to feel the warmth of his skin beneath her fingertips. But she didn't. She couldn't. Because what happened last night had been a mistake. A beautiful, intoxicating, irrevocable mistake. This was supposed to be a contract, a business arrangement, a facade. She had promised herself that she wouldn't let emotions get in the way, that she would keep her heart locked away, safe from a man who had made it clear he didn't believe in love. And yet last night, in the heat of passion, she had forgotten everything, forgotten the rules, forgotten the consequences. She had let herself fall into his arms, into his bed, as if this were real, as if he truly belonged to her. Guilt twisted in her chest, warring with the deep ache of longing she tried to suppress. This wasn't real. It never could be. Carefully, she slipped out from beneath the covers, biting her lip when Adrian stirred slightly, a deep sigh escaping his lips before he settled again. Moving quietly, she grabbed the silk robe draped over the chair and wrapped it tightly around herself, as if that could shield her from the mess she had created. She needed space. She needed to breathe. She turned toward the door, but before she could take a step, Adrian's deep, sleep-laced voice sent a shiver down her spine. Eleanor. She froze. Slowly she turned to face him, her pulse hammering as she met his gaze. He was awake now, those piercing blue eyes locked onto her with an intensity that made her knees weak. His voice was husky, rough from sleep, but the way he said her name, It sent a wave of heat crashing over her all over again, but she couldn't do this. She couldn't let herself hope. I need to get ready for work, she murmured, forcing herself to look away. For a moment, Adrian just watched her, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he nodded. All right. She turned quickly, leaving before she could change her mind, before she could do something reckless, like crawl back into bed and lose herself in him all over again. 2 weeks later. Elena stood in front of the bathroom mirror, her hands trembling as she stared down at the pregnancy test. Positive. Her breath hitched. No, this couldn't be happening. Her vision blurred as she gripped the edge of the sink, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might shatter. The white plastic stick in her hand might as well have been a ticking time bomb. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to wake up from this nightmare. But when she opened them again, the 2 dark pink lines were still there, undeniable. A strangled sound left her lips as she stumbled back, sinking onto the closed toilet lid, her fingers tightening around the test until her knuckles turned white. She and Adrian had only been together once, one night. But it had been enough. A sob bubbled in her throat as reality crashed down on her. She was pregnant with his child. Not just one child, twins. The doctor's words from earlier echoed in her head, sending another wave of shock through her. 2 babies. Her heart clenched. How was she supposed to tell Adrian? Their marriage wasn't real, it was a contract. He had never wanted emotional complications, let alone a family. He had been clear about that from the start. What if he didn't want them? What if he saw this pregnancy as nothing more than an inconvenience? Tears burned in her eyes as fear coiled tightly around her chest. Adrian was powerful, controlled, completely unreadable. She had no idea how he would react to this. Would he push her away? Would he demand she get rid of the babies? A sharp pain stabbed through her heart at the thought. She wouldn't let that happen. She wouldn't let anyone take them from her. But what if she was wrong? What if, for the first time, Adrian surprised her? She placed a trembling hand over her flat stomach, trying to process the life growing inside her, the 2 tiny heartbeats that already meant more to her than anything in the world. One thing was certain, she couldn't keep this secret forever. Because soon, Adrian Sinclair would find out that their one night of passion had led to something life-changing. Elena had never been good at keeping secrets. She'd always been the type to wear her emotions on her sleeve, to speak before thinking, to be painfully honest even when she shouldn't be. But this was different. This was a secret that could change everything. For 2 weeks, she had walked into the office, pretending her world hadn't been turned upside down, keeping up the facade that nothing was wrong, nothing had changed. But deep down, everything had changed. Every glance in the mirror was a stark reminder that she wasn't just Elena Carter, the ambitious designer who had signed a marriage contract with a billionaire. She was now Elena Carter Sinclair, carrying the children of a man who didn't believe in love. She had told herself she would wait, that she would find the right moment, the perfect words. But as each day passed, the weight of the truth pressed down on her like an iron cage, trapping her between fear and responsibility. What would Adrian say? What would he do? Would he be furious? Would he feel betrayed? Or worse, would he feel nothing at all? The thought made her chest tighten. She had spent the past 2 weeks moving carefully around him, careful not to meet his gaze for too long, careful not to linger in his presence more than necessary. At work, she kept things strictly professional, responding to his emails with the efficiency of an employee, not a wife. At home, she made excuses to stay in her room longer, pretending to be buried in work or exhausted from the day. It was a delicate balance, a game of distance and avoidance, but she should have known better. Adrian Sinclair wasn't a man who let things slip past him, and now she was standing at the edge of a breaking point at the office. Elena. Her name cut through the silence like a knife. She looked up from her desk just as Adrian stepped out of his office. Even without saying much, he had a way of commanding attention, the power in his stance, the way his sharp blue eyes pinned her in place. He was a man who didn't ask for things twice, and right now he was looking at her like he knew something was off. "You're distracted." It wasn't a question, it was a fact. Elena swallowed, forcing a polite smile. "I'm just busy." His expression didn't change, but his gaze darkened slightly, as if he didn't quite believe her. "Really?" His voice was unreadable, smooth yet firm, the way it always was when he was picking apart a lie. She gripped the pen in her hand, willing herself to stay composed. But before she could think of a response, he moved. 1 second, he was standing near his office door. The next, he was right there, towering over her desk, close enough that she could smell the faint trace of his cologne. Woodsy, clean, distinctly him. The scent sent an uninvited shiver down her spine. "You've been avoiding me," he murmured. Her breath caught in her throat. He was too close, too perceptive. "I haven't," she lied, but even she could hear how weak it sounded. A muscle ticked in his jaw. "You forget who you're talking to, Mrs. Sinclair." Her stomach twisted at the way he said her name. Mrs. Sinclair. The reminder sent a strange mix of emotions flooding through her. She was his wife in name, in contract, in legal documents that bound them together, but not in heart. Or at least, he didn't think so. If he knew what she was hiding, would that change? She forced herself to meet his gaze. "I just need some space, Adrian." A long pause. Silence stretched between them, heavy and unspoken. His blue eyes searched hers, as if trying to read between the lines of her carefully controlled expression. Had he figured it out? Was that why he was pushing for answers? Then finally he exhaled, stepping back. "Fine," he said. But there was something in his voice, something restrained, something controlled. He was giving her space, but it wasn't without cost. "Space won't change what's between us." His voice was quiet, but the weight of those words pressed against her chest like an unspoken promise. Her heart pounded. Did he know? Number impossible. Adrian held her gaze for a second longer, then nodded. "Come home early tonight," he said, turning to leave. "We need to talk." Her stomach twisted into knots. He never asked, "When the CEO finds out." Elena's hands trembled as she stepped into Adrian's penthouse that evening, her heart pounding violently against her ribs. The moment she crossed the threshold, she felt it, the unmistakable tension in the air, thick and suffocating, like a storm gathering strength. The walls of the luxurious space seemed to close in around her, amplifying the unease that had been growing inside her for weeks. She had kept the truth from him for too long, and now there was no more hiding. Her fingers clenched around the strap of her handbag as she took slow, hesitant steps forward. The penthouse was eerily silent, except for the faint hum of the city beyond the glass. Her breath caught in her throat when she spotted him, standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, his tall, imposing figure outlined by the golden hues of the evening skyline. His broad shoulders were tense, his strong posture rigid. His jacket had been discarded, and the sleeves of his crisp white shirt were rolled up to his elbows, revealing the defined muscles of his forearms. He looked composed, effortless as always, yet she knew better. He was waiting for her. A shiver ran down her spine as she forced herself to move forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. This was it. The moment she had dreaded and rehearsed over and over in her mind, yet nothing could prepare her for what was about to come. She sucked in a shaky breath, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian. His name left her lips like a plea, but he didn't turn around immediately. Instead, he remained facing the glass, his hands still in his pockets, exuding a quiet dominance that made the air around them feel charged. For several long, agonizing seconds, he said nothing. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words, with secrets she had buried too deep. Then, finally, his voice cut through the stillness, deep and smooth, yet carrying an edge that sent shivers down her spine. "Eleanor?" Her breath hitched. Slowly he turned, his icy blue eyes locking onto hers, sharp and unreadable. His expression was controlled, too controlled, but beneath that polished exterior she could sense something simmering just beneath the surface. Suspicion, calculation, analyzing her every move. "You've been distant," he stated, his voice calm, yet filled with quiet intensity. "You've been hiding something." Elena's pulse spiked. He knew. Maybe not everything, but he knew something was off. She could see it in the way his gaze narrowed slightly, in the way he studied her, as if he could see right through her carefully crafted facade. Her throat felt dry, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. She had practiced this moment in her head 1,000 times, had imagined every possible reaction he could have, every possible outcome, but now that she was standing before him, under the weight of his piercing gaze, she was terrified. "I want the truth," Adrian continued, his voice low, unwavering. A sharp exhale left her lips. No more running. Her stomach twisted painfully as she finally whispered the words that would change everything. "I'm pregnant." The confession hung in the air like a bomb. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Absolute silence. Adrian didn't move, didn't blink. His expression remained unreadable, but something in his posture shifted, something subtle, yet unmistakable. Elena's heart pounded as she watched his face carefully, bracing for his reaction. Would he be angry? Would he think she had betrayed him? Would he walk away, tell her this changed nothing between them? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, his lips parted. His voice, when he spoke, was dangerously low. "Say that again." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I'm pregnant, Adrian." Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't look away. He deserved to hear everything. "With twins." A sharp breath escaped him. His expression remained unreadable, but she saw it, the flicker of something raw, something undeniably intense in his gaze. His jaw tightened, his hands flexing at his sides, as if trying to process the weight of her words. She expected him to lash out, to demand why she hadn't told him sooner, to tell her she had made a mistake by keeping this from him. But what she didn't expect was the way he crossed the room in 3 powerful strides, cupped her face in his strong hands, and crashed his lips onto hers. Elena gasped against his mouth, completely unprepared for the sheer possessiveness in his kiss. His lips were firm, demanding, yet there was something deeper beneath it, a desperation, a need that sent her head spinning. "You're carrying my children," he murmured against her lips, his voice husky, filled with something primal. She shivered. "Yes." His grip on her tightened, his hands sliding down to her waist, pulling her against him as if he needed to feel her, to assure himself that this was real, that she was real. "Mine," he whispered, the single word filled with an intensity that made her knees weak. "You and them, mine." Tears burned in her eyes. She had been so afraid that he would push her away, that he would tell her this changed nothing, that their contract remained the same, that she was merely a woman who had happened to get pregnant. But instead, he was claiming her. Adrian pulled back slightly, his blue eyes blazing with something she had never seen before, something possessive, protective, almost reverent. "You should have told me sooner," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less intense. "I was scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. His hold on her tightened. "Never be scared of me, Elena." His forehead pressed against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I will take care of you, of them, of us." Her heart clenched painfully. This wasn't just a contract anymore. This wasn't just about signatures on paper or a calculated arrangement. This was real, and there was no turning back. Elena had always known that Adrian Sinclair was a powerful, controlling man. He wasn't just wealthy, he was the kind of man who commanded attention the second he stepped into a room. The kind of man whose sharp blue eyes could freeze a person in place with a single glance. People bowed to his demands, rushed to meet his expectations, desperate for his approval. He never had to raise his voice. His presence alone was enough to shape the world around him. He was used to power, control, and absolute authority over every aspect of his life. But what she never expected, what she never could have prepared for, was what happened after he found out she was pregnant. He didn't just take responsibility. He claimed her. He became possessive, protective, overwhelmingly, inescapably obsessed. And it started the very next morning. Eleanor woke slowly, her body sinking into the warmth surrounding her. The air in the penthouse was cool, but she felt nothing but heat, wrapped in something soft, safe, and undeniably intimate. Her mind was groggy, her limbs heavy, her breathing slow and steady as she drifted between sleep and wakefulness. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. But then, as her senses sharpened, she became acutely aware of the heavy, muscular arm draped over her waist, the steady rise and fall of the strong chest pressed against her back, the unmistakable presence of Adrian. Her breath hitched. Reality came rushing back. The night before, his reaction, the way he had looked at her after she told him she was pregnant, the way his lips had crashed onto hers with a desperation she still didn't fully understand, the way he had whispered, "Mine." And now she was wrapped in his arms, tangled in his bed, completely claimed. Her heart pounded violently. She had to move. She had to create distance before this went any further, before she let herself sink deeper into the dangerous comfort of his embrace. She had spent weeks trying to keep a boundary between them, convincing herself that their marriage was nothing more than a business deal, that the lines between them could never blur. But now, everything had changed. She shifted slightly, intending to slip out from under his arm, but the second she moved, his grip tightened. "Don't!" A shiver ran down her spine at the sound of his voice, deep, husky, thick with sleep. That voice, that tone, it wasn't a request, it was a demand. Low, possessive, filled with something unspoken. Elena froze. She felt his breath against her neck, slow and controlled, as if he were still half asleep but unwilling to let her go. He wasn't awake yet, at least not fully, but even in his sleep, his instincts demanded that she stay exactly where she was. Her stomach fluttered, not just from his touch, but from the life growing inside her. Their babies. Adrian's hand slid down from her waist, his fingers grazing the curve of her stomach before resting there with gentle pressure. His palm was large, warm, steady, possessive, protective, claiming. She swallowed hard. "I still can't believe it," he murmured. Eleanor turned her head slightly, finding him already awake, his piercing blue eyes watching her with an unreadable expression. There was something in his gaze, something raw, something that made her breath catch in her throat. "Believe what?" she asked softly. His fingers flexed slightly against her stomach, his thumb brushing over the fabric of her nightgown, as if he needed the physical confirmation. "That my children are in there," he murmured. Then, softer, almost reverently, "that you're mine." Eleanor's pulse skyrocketed. This wasn't the Adrian Sinclair who had proposed a contract marriage with cold logic and calculated detachment. This wasn't the man who had once told her their relationship would never be real. This man, the one holding her, touching her like she was his entire world, was different. Her lips parted, her breath uneven. "Adrian, we said this marriage wouldn't be real." His jaw tightened instantly, a flicker of something dangerous passing through his gaze. "Do you still believe that?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. She hesitated. Did she? Because everything had changed. The moment she told him she was pregnant, something inside him had shifted, and now it was in his touch, his words, his possessive gaze that refused to look anywhere but at her. Before she could answer, he suddenly shifted, his lips brushing against her temple in a gesture so tender it left her breathless. Then his voice turned firm, commanding. "I don't want you overworking." Eleanor frowned, startled by the sudden change in topic. "I'm fine." "You're pregnant," he countered smoothly. "With my twins." His hand caressed her stomach again, his gaze darkening slightly. "You're not lifting a finger at work anymore." Her brows furrowed. "Adrian, I can still do my job." His expression hardened. "Not happening." Elena sat up slightly, pulling away just enough to look at him fully. "You can't just decide that for me." Adrian sat up as well, one arm propping him up. Elena never thought she would see the day when Adrian Sinclair, the ruthless, untouchable CEO, would become clingy. He was a man known for his cold efficiency, a man who built his empire with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. He was feared in the corporate world, admired by competitors, and practically worshipped by his employees. He didn't waste time on emotions. He didn't let personal matters affect his business. He didn't get attached, and yet it had only been one day since he found out about her pregnancy, and already he had taken complete control of her life. It wasn't just a small change. It was a complete, overwhelming shift, one she hadn't been prepared for. She woke up to a nutritionist-approved breakfast, a personal driver waiting to take her anywhere she wanted, and Adrian checking on her every 5 minutes, as if she were made of glass. And the worst part, he wasn't even subtle about it. He hovered, watched, controlled, obsessed. And now, as she stepped into Sinclair Corporation, the company where she had spent years proving herself, she realized that Adrian's overprotectiveness had spread into her professional life as well. Elena walked through the grand entrance of Sinclair Corporation, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. She held her head high, determined to pretend as if nothing had changed. She was still the company's chief strategist. She was still one of Adrian's most trusted employees. Or at least she had been, before he found out about the twins. The moment she stepped inside, something felt off, the usual hum of the office. The murmured conversations, the clicking of keyboards, the ringing phones, was different, quieter. And then she noticed it. Everyone was staring at her. She frowned, her gaze flickering across the room. Employees whispered behind their hands. A few exchanged nervous glances. Some looked downright terrified, as if something catastrophic had happened. A strange feeling settled in her stomach. What the hell was going on? She quickened her pace toward her office, only to stop dead in her tracks. Her desk? Gone. Her usual workspace, where she had spent countless hours working, strategizing, solving the company's biggest problems, had disappeared. The papers she had left behind? Vanished? Her computer? Nowhere to be seen. The entire space had been emptied out, as if she had never worked there at all. A sharp wave of disbelief hit her. What the actual hell? Her pulse spiked as she spun around, searching for answers, and that was when she nearly collided with the very man responsible for this madness. Adrian Sinclair. He stood there perfectly composed, his dark blue suit sharp against the crisp white of his shirt. His hands were casually tucked into his pockets, and a far too pleased smirk curled at his lips. His piercing blue eyes locked onto hers, filled with something dangerous, possession, amusement, satisfaction. Elena's heart pounded, a mixture of frustration and something far more dangerous. She crossed her arms. "Adrian, where is my desk?" His smirk deepened. "You don't need it." She blinked. Once, twice, her jaw practically dropped. "Excuse me?" His gaze remained steady, unwavering, filled with unshakable authority. "You're pregnant," he said smoothly, as if that explained everything. "I don't want you working anymore." Eleanor gaped at him. He couldn't be serious. "Adrian, you can't just fire me." His lips twitched, as if barely restraining his amusement. "I didn't fire you." He tilted his head slightly, eyes gleaming. "I promoted you." She frowned. "Promoted me to what?" His smirk turned infuriatingly smug. "My wife." Heat flooded her cheeks. That was not an answer. "That's not a job, Adrian," she snapped, exasperation lacing her voice. His expression didn't change. "It is now." Before she could argue, he took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the space between them. The office suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker, heavier. His scent, clean, intoxicating, overwhelmingly masculine, wrapped around her, distracting her in ways it shouldn't. "Your new responsibility," he murmured, his voice dropping lower, "is resting, eating well, and letting me spoil you." Her stomach flipped. She narrowed her eyes. "Adrian, this is insane." "You're carrying my children," he countered simply. "You shouldn't be stressing over work." Elena groaned, pressing her fingers against her temples. This man was impossible. "Adrian, I want to work." He sighed dramatically, as if she were the one being unreasonable. "Fine," he said, his voice laced with mock surrender. For a split second, she felt relief, until he pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and within seconds she heard him say, "Hire a full team of assistants to handle Elena's workload, effective immediately." Her eyes widened. "Adrian," he ended the call and slid the phone back into his pocket. "Problem solved." Her frustration boiled over. "Are you serious?" she demanded. Adrian's smirk returned. "Dead serious." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. What was she even supposed to say to that? He tucked his hands back into his pockets, watching her with that maddeningly smug, arrogant, impossibly attractive expression. "You can still come to the office," he said, as if he were being generous. "But only if you promise to sit in my office, rest on the couch, and let me take care of you." Her breath hitched. Take care of her. Adrian Sinclair, the man who had once insisted their marriage was nothing more than a contract, was now utterly, obsessively, inescapably devoted. "Adrian—" "Elena," he interrupted, stepping even closer. Close enough that she felt his warmth, close enough that her body betrayed her, reacting to him in ways she wished it wouldn't. His large hand gently pressed against her stomach, his touch warm, firm, unwavering. His fingers splayed slightly, as if trying to feel the life growing inside her, as if grounding himself in the reality that she carried his babies. Elena had always known Adrian Sinclair was a powerful man, a force of nature, a man who commanded every room he entered, his mere presence exuding dominance, control, and an unshakable authority that made others tremble. He was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire, a man feared by his enemies, respected by his employees, and admired by women who would do anything to capture even a fraction of his attention. He was untouchable, unreachable, until the day she became his wife. She had expected him to treat their marriage as a business deal, a contract, nothing more, a cold arrangement without emotions. But what she hadn't expected was for him to become her biggest weakness. Days passed, and everything changed. Adrian was no longer just the ruthless CEO she had married. He was everywhere. His presence consumed every part of her life, suffocating yet intoxicating, overwhelming yet addictive. He was the man who held her close at night, whispering against her skin that she belonged to him, that she was his wife, the mother of his children, his obsession. He was the man who touched her stomach reverently, as if the life growing inside her was the most precious thing in the world, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. And above all, he was the man who wouldn't let her lift a single damn finger. at the penthouse. "Elena," Adrian's deep, commanding voice called from the kitchen. She rolled her eyes. "Here we go again." She knew that tone. The overprotective, controlling, possessive tone. The one that meant he had caught her doing something he didn't approve of. Seconds later, he appeared in the doorway, arms crossed over his broad chest, his navy blue shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing strong, veined hands that had spent far too much time cradling her stomach, as if it were made of porcelain. His sharp blue eyes locked onto her, predatory, intense. His gaze dropped to the glass in her hand. "I told you not to stand for too long," he scolded, his voice edged with frustration. Elena sighed, placing the glass down on the counter. "Adrian, I was just getting water." He took slow, measured steps toward her. "And where are the butlers I hired?" She arched an eyebrow. "Probably hiding because they're terrified of you." His lips twitched. The bastard was amused. "Good." She groaned, dragging a hand down her face. There was no reasoning with this man. "Adrian, I'm pregnant, not fragile." His jaw clenched. That was the wrong thing to say. His blue eyes darkened, a storm brewing within them. "You're carrying my twins, Elena." The way he said it, low, possessive, dripping with fierce protectiveness, sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. Before she could react, before she could argue, Adrian suddenly scooped her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. A startled gasp escaped her lips. "Adrian, put me down." "No." His grip tightened around her, unyielding, unshakable. His scent surrounded her, clean and masculine, mixed with the faintest hint of the cologne she was beginning to associate with safety. He carried her effortlessly to the couch, his movements smooth, practiced, as if he had done this 1,000 times before, as if holding her in his arms was where she was always meant to be. Gently, he placed her down, making sure she was comfortable before kneeling beside her. Kneeling. Eleanor stared at him, breath caught in her throat. Adrian Sinclair didn't kneel for anyone. His large, warm hands found her stomach. And then, softly, almost reverently, he touched her. "You don't understand, do you?" he murmured, voice lower now. Elena swallowed. Something in his tone sent chills down her spine. "Understand what?" she asked quietly. His fingers caressed her stomach, slow, gentle movements, as if he were memorizing the shape of their unborn children. When he lifted his gaze to meet hers, she saw something raw in his expression, something vulnerable. "I can't lose you." Her heart stopped. Adrian Sinclair, the man who built an empire with ruthless precision, the man who never let anyone see his weaknesses, was looking at her as if she were his entire world. The air shifted, everything shifted. "I've spent my life building an empire, Elena," he murmured, his fingers continuing their slow caress. "But none of it matters, not if I don't have you." Her chest ached. He meant it. This wasn't an act. This wasn't just some possessive, overprotective CEO controlling his wife. This was something deeper, real, consuming, love. Her lips trembled. She didn't know how to respond. She wasn't prepared for this. She wasn't prepared for him. "Elena!" His voice was softer now, almost pleading. He reached for her hand, pressing a slow, lingering kiss to her palm, his lips warm against her skin. His gaze burned into hers. "Tell me you're mine." Her breath caught. He had asked this before, so many times. But this time was different. This time it wasn't a demand. This time it was a request, a plea. She wanted to say it. She wanted to fall completely, to let herself believe this wasn't just obsession, wasn't just some twisted need to control her. It was love, that he loved her, that he wasn't just claiming her because of the babies, but because of her. But could she risk it? Could she risk her heart on Adrian Sinclair, the man who had once told her their marriage would never be real, the man who was now looking at her as if he couldn't breathe without her? As he pressed his lips to her stomach, murmuring words of devotion to the twins inside her, as his fingers traced gentle circles against her skin, as his entire body seemed to melt against hers in a silent vow of forever, she realized, maybe it was already too late. Adrian Sinclair had always been a possessive man. It wasn't just a part of his nature. It was ingrained in his very existence, the way he operated, the way he lived. He didn't like sharing what was his, and he especially couldn't tolerate the idea of another man being anywhere near Elena. It had always been there, this primal, protective instinct. But now that she was carrying his twins, his possessiveness had evolved into something even more dangerous. It was no longer just an urge to keep her close. It was an obsession, a relentless, all-consuming need to make sure no other man even so much as breathed in her direction. And today, someone was about to test just how far that jealousy went. At the office, Elena knew Adrian was overprotective, controlling, and maddeningly unreasonable when it came to her well-being. She had seen him hover like a shadow, had felt his hands constantly guiding her away from anything he deemed too dangerous, which, in his mind, was practically everything. But she hadn't realized just how bad it had gotten until she stepped into an important business meeting that morning. A meeting with one of their most valuable clients, a male client. The moment Elena walked into the conference room, Daniel Carter, the CEO of a billion-dollar tech firm, rose to his feet. He was charming, polished, and exuded the easy confidence of a man who was used to winning. The second he saw her, he smiled. "Mrs. Sinclair," Daniel greeted smoothly, extending a hand toward her. "It's always a pleasure." Elena returned the smile, already reaching to shake his hand out of sheer professionalism, but before she could make contact, before her fingertips could even brush against his palm, a strong, unyielding grip suddenly wrapped around her wrist. She gasped softly, startled by the firm, possessive hold. Before she could react, before she could even turn her head, a tall, towering presence stepped between them, effectively blocking her from Daniel's view. Adrian. His posture was relaxed, but his energy, lethal. His icy blue eyes locked onto Daniel like a predator surveying his prey, and his grip on Elena's wrist was firm, but not enough to hurt, just enough to make it very clear that he was in control. "Mr. Carter," Adrian said smoothly, his voice calm, but there was an unmistakable warning underneath the surface. "I don't believe you need to touch my wife to conduct business." Elena inhaled sharply. "Oh no." Daniel raised a brow, clearly amused by Adrian's reaction. "Adrian, I was just being polite." "Polite? Polite?" Adrian's sharp jaw clenched, and something dark flickered behind his gaze. His wife, his pregnant wife, the woman carrying his twins. Adrian didn't believe in coincidences, and he certainly didn't believe in men smiling at his wife like that. Elena felt the tension spike in the room, the air thick with unspoken hostility. She knew Adrian, knew that look in his eyes, knew the way his entire body tensed when he was restraining himself from doing something irrational. She sighed in frustration. He was being ridiculous. "Adrian, seriously?" she muttered under her breath, glancing up at him with an exasperated look. But her husband was completely unfazed. Instead of backing down, his hand slowly slid from her wrist to her lower back, a deliberate possessive motion, and then, without hesitation, he pulled her flush against his body. Elena sucked in a sharp breath, her cheeks flaming with heat. "Darling," Adrian murmured, his lips dangerously close to Adrian Sinclair, had spent his entire life mastering control. It was his greatest weapon, his most trusted shield. He had built an empire with his cold, calculated decisions, never allowing emotions to cloud his judgment. No weakness, no vulnerabilities, only absolute authority over everything and everyone around him. That was who he was. That was how he ruled the world. But when it came to Eleanor, that control shattered. He was no longer the ruthless, untouchable CEO who stood above the rest. No longer the man who made others tremble with just a glance. When it came to her, Adrian became something else entirely, something raw, something desperate, something utterly and hopelessly in love. And tonight, the whole world would see it. The gala night. The Sinclair Corporation's annual charity gala was the most exclusive event of the year. A night where the most powerful figures in the world gathered. Billionaires, politicians, CEOs and celebrities, all under one roof. Deals worth millions were made here, alliances were formed, reputations were built. It was supposed to be a night of power and strategy, where control was everything. But for Adrian, there was only one reason he was here tonight. Elena. The moment she walked into the grand ballroom, a hush fell over the crowd. Conversations stilled, glasses paused mid-air, and every gaze turned toward the entrance. She was breathtaking, dressed in a champagne-colored gown that shimmered under the crystal chandeliers, the fabric hugging her curves in all the right places. She looked like a goddess. And when Adrian's sharp gaze dropped lower, to the gentle swell of her belly where his twins were growing, his entire body tightened with a deep primal possessiveness. She was carrying his children, his. She was his wife, his woman, his. And yet other men were looking at her, too long, too closely, too admiringly. Something inside Adrian snapped, ignoring the murmuring crowd, ignoring the business associates vying for his attention. He crossed the room without hesitation, his strides powerful, unyielding, predatory. His entire focus narrowed down to one person, his Elena. She turned just as he reached her, her delicate features lighting up with warmth. "Adrian," she greeted softly, her voice sending shivers down his spine. His arms were already around her, his grip firm but gentle, pulling her against him. His gaze dropped to her stomach. "You're tired," he murmured, his deep, velvety voice filled with concern. Eleanor sighed. "Adrian, I just got here." He didn't care. The idea of her standing for too long, of her exerting even the smallest amount of energy when she should be resting, made something tighten in his chest. His arm wrapped even more securely around her waist, claiming her in front of everyone. And then he turned, to the crowd, to the men who had dared to admire her, who had let their eyes linger on what belonged to him. And without hesitation, without a single warning, Adrian Sinclair leaned in and kissed her. A slow, deep, dominating kiss. Right there, in front of everyone. A gasp rippled through the room. The sound of shocked whispers and murmurs filled the air. Cameras flashed. The entire world had just witnessed something unprecedented. Adrian Sinclair, the cold and untouchable CEO, publicly losing control over a woman. But Adrian, he didn't care, because in that moment, nothing else existed. Just Eleanor. Just the way she melted into him, her lips parting in shock before surrendering to his possessive demand. Just the way his hand splayed across her lower back, keeping her pressed against him as if he never intended to let go. And when he finally broke the kiss, his gaze was dark and burning with an emotion so fierce it left Elena breathless. He turned slightly, just enough to look at the crowd. His message was clear. She is mine. No man in that room would ever dare to look at her again. Later that night, the drive back to the penthouse was silent. Elena could still feel the heat of his kiss on her lips, the way his hands had held her like a possession, like something he would never let anyone take away. The entire world had just witnessed it. Adrian Sinclair, the man who never showed emotion in public, the man who never let anyone see beyond his ruthless mask, had just claimed her in front of everyone. And she still wasn't sure what to think about it. As soon as they entered the penthouse, she turned to him, her heart racing. "Adrian!" He didn't let her finish. With one swift movement, he had her pressed against the nearest wall, caging her in with his strong arms. His blue eyes burned into hers. "Elena," he murmured, his voice low and rough, "I need you to understand something." She swallowed hard. "What?" His hands came up to cup her face, his touch unbearably tender. "This isn't just a contract anymore," he whispered. Her breath caught. His thumb brushed over her cheek, his expression raw and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I don't just want you as my wife on paper," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I want all of you." Elena's heart pounded so hard it hurt. "Adrian," she choked, emotion thick in her throat. His lips barely grazed hers, his breath warm, his hands trembling slightly against her skin. "Tell me you're mine," he murmured. "Tell me this isn't just a deal for you anymore." Tears burned in her eyes, because deep down she already knew the truth. She was his, and she always would be. Elena had been fighting against her feelings for far too long. At first, it had seemed like the logical thing to do. Keep her heart guarded, separate herself from the overwhelming emotions that Adrian Sinclair stirred within her. She had told herself that their marriage was just a contract, a means to an end, a deal that made sense for both of them, especially with the babies on the way. Adrian was only acting the way he did because of the twins, that's all. But deep down, she knew the truth. She could deny it all she wanted, but there was no escaping the undeniable fact. She had already fallen for him. She had fallen for Adrian Sinclair, the ruthless, untouchable billionaire who had walked into her life as her husband, but had slowly become everything to her. The one person she couldn't imagine life without. The man who, with every passing day, claimed more and more of her heart. And now, there was no turning back. Eleanor awoke to the soft glow of morning light streaming through the curtains, the peaceful silence of the penthouse surrounding her. The previous night felt like a dream, a whirlwind of emotions, passion, and unexpected declarations of love. But as her eyes fluttered open, she saw something that instantly made her heart race. Adrian. He was sitting at the edge of the bed, fully dressed in his usual crisp white shirt and perfectly tailored black pants, his dark hair slightly tousled from the night before. But unlike every other morning, when he would have been long gone, headed to his meetings or his office, this morning was different. This morning, he was just sitting there, staring at her. His blue eyes were soft, but still intense, tracing every inch of her face, as if he was memorizing it, as if he needed to capture this moment forever. "Morning," Eleanor whispered, her voice still heavy with sleep. Adrian smiled, the warmth in his eyes impossible to ignore. He leaned in, brushing a strand of hair away from her cheek with the tenderness that had started to take over his every action when it came to her. "You're beautiful in the mornings," he said, his voice low, filled with adoration. Her heart skipped a beat at his words, and she swallowed, suddenly feeling a bit overwhelmed. This was the same man who had built empires, who controlled everything around him with ruthless precision, and yet here he was, showing her such vulnerability. This man, who had once been untouchable, was now pouring out a tenderness that she had never expected. "Are you going to work?" she asked softly, trying to shift the focus of the conversation, still trying to reconcile the man before her with the cold CEO she knew him to be. Adrian's lips curved into a sly smirk. "I cancelled my meetings." Her eyes widened in surprise. "You cancelled your meetings? Adrian, you never do that." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned closer, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, and when he pulled back, his gaze locked onto hers. "You're more important," he said simply. Her breath caught in her throat. He was serious. This wasn't about the contract anymore. It wasn't about their deal or the babies or anything that had once kept their relationship at arm's length. It was about them. And for the first time, Elena realized that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one falling in love. Elena found herself standing in the nursery that Adrian had designed for their twins. It wasn't finished yet. There were still soft pastel colors on the walls, delicate cribs waiting to be filled, and shelves lined with tiny stuffed animals, waiting for the babies to arrive. Her fingers trembled as she reached out to touch one of the small onesies folded neatly in a drawer. The weight of the fabric, the softness of it, made her chest tighten. She had spent so long convincing herself that this marriage, this life they were building together, was temporary, that it was just a means to an end. But standing in this room, surrounded by the future they were creating together, Elena realized that her heart couldn't keep lying to her. This wasn't just about a contract. She didn't want this to end. She didn't want to walk away from this man, from this family they were starting. She wanted Adrian, not as her CEO, not as the man who had married her for a deal, but as her husband, her partner, her forever. The truth settled deep in her heart, a truth she had tried to hide for too long. She was in love with Adrian Sinclair, and there was nothing she could do to deny it any longer. When Adrian came home that night, he found Elena waiting for him in their bedroom. She stood near the window, her hands nervously clasped together in front of her. The light from the setting sun cast a soft glow on her face, and for a moment, Adrian just stood there, watching her. "Elena," he murmured, his voice a little softer than usual. She turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest, as if she had a secret she could no longer keep. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Adrian's eyes darkened, his brow furrowing in concern. "What is it?" Her breath caught, her mind racing. Could she really say the words out loud? Could she really admit to Adrian that she had fallen in love with him? That she wanted a future with him, not just as his wife, but as his woman, his equal, his everything? "I love you, Adrian," she whispered, her voice shaky but resolute. There was a long, heavy silence. For the first time in their marriage, the powerful CEO was speechless. His blue eyes widened slightly, as if the words she had just spoken had completely thrown him off guard. Elena's heart raced, her chest tightening with the fear that maybe he didn't feel the same. But before she could finish what she'd been about to say, Adrian was suddenly in front of her, his lips crashing onto hers in a kiss so deep, so consuming, that it stole the air from her lungs. This wasn't just a kiss of possession, not just a kiss to prove a point or to claim her as his own. This kiss was raw, aching, full of love, a love that neither of them had been able to hide any longer. When he finally pulled away, his forehead rested against hers, his breath coming in shallow gasps. His hands gently cupped her face, as if he was afraid she might disappear. "Elena," he whispered, his voice hoarse, raw with emotion. "Say it again." Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she kissed him again, her hands trembling as they ran through his hair. "I love you," she whispered again, this time with more conviction than ever before. Adrian inhaled sharply, as if those 3 words had completely undone him. He kissed her again, desperately, feverishly, as if he never wanted to let her go. And Elena knew then, with absolute certainty, that he never would. Adrian Sinclair was a man of few words and even fewer promises. He was not one to make grand gestures or repeat himself. Every action he took had purpose and precision. Every decision was calculated, and every move was deliberate. But when it came to Eleanor, the woman who had turned his life upside down in ways he never could have imagined, He was willing to break every rule he had set for himself. For her, he would marry her again. Not in secret this time, not as part of some contract that had once kept them apart, but for real. And this time, it would be forever. It was a hidden plan, one that Adrian kept under wraps, even from Elena. She had no idea what he was planning. Since her confession of love, he had barely left her side. He whispered soft praises against her skin, kissed her gently every chance he could, and treated her as if she were his entire world, because in truth she was. He caressed her growing baby bump, a symbol of their future. But there was something about Adrian's actions lately that felt different. He was more attentive than usual, yes, but he was also keeping something from her. He had been making calls in private, speaking with his assistant in hushed tones, his face shadowed with concentration, as if there was something serious going on. Every time she asked him what was happening, he would simply smirk and tell her not to worry. "Eleanor," he would say softly, his hands grazing her stomach as they sat together in the penthouse. "You trust me, don't you?" The words, though simple, carried weight, and each time he said them, her heart would race in anticipation of what was to come. Her brow would furrow slightly as she replied, "Of course, but—" And before she could ask more, he would cut her off, his lips brushing against her ear as he whispered, "Then don't ask questions, just say yes when the time comes." Her heart would pound in her chest, and she would be left wondering what Adrian was planning, but she didn't press him further. If there was one thing she had learned about Adrian, it was that when he was determined to do something, he would do it, no matter how much he kept it hidden. As the days passed, Elena found herself growing more curious about the mysterious events that seemed to be unfolding behind closed doors. Adrian continued to dote on her, lavishing her with affection, but his secrecy only deepened. She didn't know whether it was a surprise for the babies, a business deal, or something else entirely, but she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he had planned would change everything. And she couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness, wondering if she was about to witness something that would redefine their love. And then, one evening, it happened. Adrian told her they were going out for dinner, but Elena had no idea that this night would be unlike any other. She had no expectations, no inkling of what he had up his sleeve. He led her out to the car, his hand holding hers gently as they made their way into the city. The drive felt like a blur, and by the time they arrived, Eleanor had no idea where they were. Adrian simply smiled at her as he opened the car door and helped her out. She followed him, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, until they reached the rooftop of a building she had never been to before. The moment Elena stepped onto the rooftop, her breath caught in her throat. The entire space was bathed in soft, warm candlelight, casting a golden glow on everything around them. The gentle music playing in the background seemed to set the perfect tone, and the air was filled with the sweet fragrance of roses. The entire place was covered in thousands of roses, red, white, and pink, their petals soft and delicate, arranged in such a way that it looked like something out of a dream. She could hardly believe her eyes. And standing in the center of it all was Adrian. He was dressed in his usual tailored black suit, but there was something different about him tonight. His eyes held a deeper emotion, something Elena couldn't quite place. Something that made her heart skip a beat as she took in the sight of him standing there, waiting for her. "Elena," Adrian called softly, his voice warm and inviting. He held out his hand to her, and despite the confusion swirling in her mind, she couldn't help but take a shaky step forward, drawn to him like a magnet. "What is this?" she asked, her voice a mixture of awe and disbelief as she approached him. Adrian's lips curved into the faintest smile, his eyes sparkling with love as he answered, "You'll see." As she reached him, he gently took her hands in his thumb brushing across her skin in a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. His touch was soft, yet there was an undeniable strength behind it. Strength that had supported her through every challenge they had faced together. "Elena," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion as he looked deeply into her eyes. "The first time I married you, it was in secret. We were bound by a contract, a business deal." He paused, his chest rising with a breath as he seemed to gather his thoughts. "But even then I didn't realize I was marrying the love of my life." Her breath hitched at his words, the meaning behind them sinking deep into her heart. Her chest ached as she listened to him, her eyes searching his face for any sign that he was just saying this out of obligation or some lingering responsibility. But no, the sincerity in his gaze was undeniable, and she knew that every word he was speaking came from the deepest parts of him. "Even then," he continued, his voice dropping lower as he slowly sank down on one knee in front of her, "I didn't realize how much you would come to mean to me, how much I would need you, how much I would love you." Elena gasped as she saw him reach into his pocket, pulling out a small, elegant box. Her hands trembled as he opened it to reveal a dazzling diamond ring, sparkling under the candlelight like a star. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "This time," Adrian said softly, his voice filled with passion and love, "I'm not asking as your CEO. I'm not asking as the man you signed a contract with." He looked up at her, his blue eyes full of nothing but love and longing. "I'm asking as the man who is hopelessly, endlessly in love with you." Tears instantly sprang to Elena's eyes, her heart swelling with emotion. This was it, the moment she had always dreamed of. This was the moment that Adrian was finally making it real. He wasn't just her husband on paper anymore. He was asking her to be his wife, forever. "Elena Sinclair," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Will you marry me? For real this time?" Elena's heart was bursting. She couldn't speak, the words caught in her throat, but the tears were already streaming down her face. She couldn't hold them back any longer. She dropped to her knees in front of him, cupping his face with trembling hands as she whispered, "Yes, Adrian. 1,000 times, yes." A deep, relieved groan escaped from Adrian's lips, and before she knew it, his lips were on hers, kissing her as if he never wanted to stop. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer as they both sank into the kiss, the world fading away. There was no one else. There was only them, only their love. And when Adrian finally slid the ring onto her finger, pressing a reverent kiss to her hand, Elena knew. She had never been more certain of anything in her life. She was his, forever. Elena had never believed in fairy tales. She had always seen them as stories meant to entertain, not as something that could truly happen in real life. Her life had never been easy, and the idea of a perfect romance seemed like a fantasy that only existed in books or on movie screens. She had always been practical, grounded in the realities of her world. But now, as she stood here, dressed in the most breathtaking wedding gown she had ever seen, crafted from layers of delicate silk and lace with intricate beadwork that sparkled under the lights of the grand hall, she realized in this moment she was living her very own fairy tale. The love of her life was standing at the altar, waiting for her, and the entire world was witnessing the most beautiful and unexpected transformation of a cold-hearted, ruthless CEO into a man hopelessly in love with her. This was it. This was her happily ever after. The wedding of Adrian Sinclair and Elena was no ordinary affair. The entire world had already known about their secret marriage, the one that had been based on a business contract and hidden behind closed doors. But this time, they were witnessing something far more profound. It was a union built on love, trust, and a deep understanding of each other. A love that had blossomed from something complicated and unexpected into something pure, something everlasting. The ceremony was held at a private estate that looked like it belonged in the pages of a magazine. It was a venue that whispered elegance and wealth, with towering columns, sprawling gardens, and chandeliers that seemed to glow like stars in the night sky. Every guest, from billionaires to celebrities, from the most influential people in the world to those who had simply been touched by the magic of Adrian and Elena's story, gathered to witness this momentous occasion. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, and there wasn't a single soul present who wasn't completely mesmerized by the scene unfolding before them. But Elena, she didn't see any of them. She didn't care about the opulence or the grandeur of the event. All she could see, all she could focus on, was the man waiting for her at the altar. Adrian. He stood there, looking more handsome than ever in his tailored black tuxedo. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue, were locked on her as she walked down the aisle, and there was an intensity in his gaze that sent shivers down her spine. It was as if he couldn't believe this was happening, as if he had to pinch himself to make sure it was real. Elena's heart pounded in her chest with every step she took toward him. Her hands trembled, her breath catching in her throat as she drew closer. The world around her seemed to fade away, until there was only Adrian and the deep connection they shared. When she finally reached him, her legs felt weak, but his strong hands steadied her, taking hers in his with a tenderness that made her heart ache. His touch was gentle, yet possessive, as though he never wanted to let her go. "You're stunning," Adrian whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he looked her up and down, taking in the sight of her in her wedding gown. Elena smiled, her heart racing. She couldn't find the words to respond, because no words could adequately express how she felt in this moment. Adrian's eyes were full of love, full of admiration, and for a moment Elena forgot about everything else. She forgot about the guests, the cameras flashing, the world watching them. In that moment, there was only Adrian. The vows came next, but Elena could hardly contain the overwhelming emotions surging through her. Adrian had already written his vows, but when it came time for him to speak, he didn't just recite them from a sheet of paper. Number. He looked at her with all the sincerity in his eyes, took her hands into his, and caressed her knuckles with his thumb. His voice was raw, filled with a devotion that Elena had never expected from him, but that she had come to cherish. "Elena, from the moment I married you in secret," Adrian began, his voice thick with emotion, "I didn't know what I had." He paused, his jaw clenching as if the weight of his words was too much to bear. "But I do now. You are my heart, my home, my everything." His words hit her like a wave, and her eyes welled up with tears. She had known from the moment they had met that Adrian was special, but she never imagined that he would become the love of her life in such an extraordinary way. "I vow to love you, protect you, cherish you for the rest of my life," he added, his voice cracking slightly as he spoke the words that would bind them together forever. Elena could barely speak through her tears, but when it was her turn to say her vows, she managed to find her voice, her words coming from the deepest part of her heart. As the officiant declared them husband and wife, the world seemed to fall away. Everything felt like a dream. And in that moment, Adrian pulled her into his arms, his lips crashing down onto hers in a kiss that was so full of love, so full of promise, that the entire audience gasped. There was no hiding it anymore. No more secrets. Adrian Sinclair, the ruthless CEO who had once kept his heart locked away, was now hopelessly, endlessly in love with his wife, and the world knew it. Months passed, and Elena's life took on a new rhythm. She and Adrian had built a life together, a life filled with love, laughter, and the joy of their growing family. But nothing could prepare Adrian for the moment that changed everything, the birth of their twins. The day had arrived, and Elena was in the delivery room, and Adrian was pacing outside, his usually calm and composed demeanor completely shattered. He was a man who was always in control, always confident in his ability to handle any situation, but today he was losing his mind. "She's been in there too long," he muttered, his voice tight with frustration. "Why haven't they called me in?" His assistant, who had seen Adrian go through many stressful situations, simply sighed. "Sir, it's normal. Just a little longer." A little longer? Adrian couldn't take it. His heart was pounding in his chest. He couldn't sit still any longer. And then, just when he thought he might lose his mind, the sound he had been waiting for pierced the air, a baby's cry followed by another. His heart stopped. A nurse rushed out, beaming with joy. "Mr. Sinclair, your wife and babies are safe. You can come in now." Adrian didn't wait a second longer. He stormed into the room, his eyes landing on Elena, who was cradling two tiny newborns in her arms. His breath hitched in his throat as he took in the sight. She was exhausted, her face pale, but her eyes were full of love and joy. "Adrian," she whispered, tears in her eyes, "meet our babies." His heart swelled and he slowly moved closer, his hands trembling as he touched the tiny fingers of their newborn daughter. She was so small, so perfect. "She looks like you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes never leaving her face. Elena smiled, her heart overflowing with love. "And he looks like you." Their baby boy, a perfect replica of Adrian, lay in her arms, and Adrian felt a surge of pride and love unlike anything he had ever known. This was his family. This was everything he had ever wanted. He pressed a gentle kiss to Elena's forehead, his arms wrapping around her and their babies. "I love you," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "Thank you for giving me everything I never knew I needed." Elena smiled, her head resting against his shoulder as she held their children close. "I love you too, Adrian, forever." And in that moment, as Adrian held Elena and their newborn twins, he knew without a doubt that he had finally found his happily ever after. The love of his life, the family he had always dreamed of, was right there in his arms, and he would never let it go.